10, 12 minutes is never enough for anybody that's on this panel. Especially now that I'm up here. That's like an egregious error. Lastly, Chef Joe.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum. I'm honored again to be invited by my homie and friend, Khalis. It's always good to be here at Ibrahim Islamic Center. And as I was thinking about the topic tonight, I was contemplating the message of all of the prophets and messengers. وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. We have indeed sent a messenger amongst every nation, amongst every community, saying to their communities, worship God alone and stay away from taghut, stay away from every form of excess. When we think about the excesses, and I think that what all of the other panelists have said, there's a lot of what I want to say has already been said. But when we talk about the reason for religious apathy and its relationship to racism, I think it has to do with two things. Number one, it has to do with the messaging of our religious organization. For I personally feel, and I've been an imam before, I'm not now, but I've worked in Islamic organizations, and I feel that I don't find enough organizations that have thought leadership that speaks directly to what is important to me and my children and what faces them as challenges in life. It does not open enough doors to realize the challenges of others. And so when religion is irrelevant, there will no longer be any religion, which is why we find a lot of people, as Brother Derek had said, are ambivalent to anything that has to do with religion, regardless of whether it's Islam or Christianity, Judaism, or any form of religion. And I think as well that the second reason is religious failure. Many times we see the failures of religious communities, and I'm guilty of this, as well. And we see greed and avarice, and we see racism, we see abuse, and all forms of abuse. And we say to ourselves, "This is unacceptable. How can I relate myself? How can I relate or connect myself to people like this if this is quote unquote religion?" My challenge to that would be to say that don't allow people to have a monopoly on what it means to be religious. In fact, I don't like the word religion and I don't like the word religious. I like the word faith and the word faithful, because it means that you have an i'budullah, a common core of worshiping God, which tanibul taghut, and their actions come out and you stay away from the excesses that are involved in denying the rights of others, whether it be on a microcosm of a family or a relationship or a masjid or a community or a city, right? Or even internationally. And those two things, when we fall out of our organizations not messaging and giving us relevant messages, as well as our own personal proclivities and avoidance of religious identification, what we do is each one of us develops a personal mode of spirituality for survival. But that personal bubble of spirituality that you create for yourself will not allow you to be able to address the larger societal issues of morality and justice, because you are only looking out for yourself. And this is the problem and this is where I think the nexus or where religious apathy crosses roads with racism. Now being white, in my own family, in my own social circles, I many times hear people say, there's no more racism in America, just get over it, right? This is very common. I'm sure all of you have heard that. Eric Garner was not the victim of racism. Michael Brown was not the victim of racism. And what they mean when they say that is they mean that the arresting officer didn't necessarily have a racial epithet in his mind or was directing hate towards this person. But the failure of some communities that don't have to deal with systemic problems of injustice is that racism to them means a one-on-one relationship, whereas racism to, say, the African American community may mean structural racism. So we have to be very particular about how we frame the conversation so that those that are denying our rights can understand where we're coming from. So perhaps the arresting officers for Eric Garner were not personally bad people. They weren't, cursing and saying names, but they played into a system that has stigmatized the black identity in New York. It's impossible to have the cases of stop and frisk that you have for African American and Latino men and then claim that there's not a systemic problem. So when we cordon ourselves off in personal bubbles of spirituality, right, we remain, oblivious to the struggles of other people. So because I'm focused so much on myself, I can't see systemic problems. I can only see, well, Derek and I, we get along great. What's the problem? I have black friends too, right? Right? So that's one of the problems. We have to, Derek said it, you mentioned great, something very great, and that is the light. You have to shine the light for people. And until you can enlighten their lives through a process of getting them out of their personal bubbles and allowing them to see the problems that they have and how it relates to greater social problems, then we can't move forward. So I would say to Muslims who are particular on issues that have to do with Muslim majority lands, you should understand that domestic policy is symbiotically related to foreign policy. And if you look historically, you will see that one of the reasons that imperialism was against independence in Africa and Asia was so that they would not have to grant independence to people that they viewed as less than them in their own countries, and vice versa. There is an attack on the young black male, and it's vindicated by the fact that they are criminals, right? And when that is used to justify drone strikes in Muslim countries against criminals, all outside of the due process of law, because I'm only thinking of what is good for me in my small utilitarian bubble of spirituality and me being a good person. So I know that there was a mention of post-racialism and post-racial identity. I, for one, am against this. I'm very thankful that I am from European descent. And I think that everyone who is from African descent or Asian descent or Indian descent or any descent should be thankful, not proud, but thankful of the unique position that God has put them in to draw attention and to open the light for other people. And when we forget who we are, we will naturally forget about the structural problems that we have in our communities that we either are affected by or we implicitly cause to be affected against others. And so it takes realism of who we are and a consciousness of what our responsibilities and what our roles are, so that we can recognize that جَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ, we have made you tribes and nations, لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may know one another. And there's if all of us were automatons and we were all alike, there would be no variety in life. There would be no thanking Allah for His blessings. On the day when Allah took the soul of Adam, or He created Adam, and He took the souls of all of His progeny from his back, and He placed them out in front of the plain of Arafah. And this is narrated by Ubay ibn Ka'b in the Musnad of Imam Ahmed. Adam alayhi salam, he looked amongst them and he saw those that were rich and those that were poor, and those that were healthy and those that were sick, and those that were beautiful and those that were less than that, and those that were red and yellow and black and white. And Adam said, Ya Rabbi, lawla sawayta baynahum. Lord, if you'd only make them equal. Allah said, "Uhibbu an ushkar." I love to be thanked.
Time. So, before I go into the questions, I just want to take an opportunity to thank the panelists again. A person's time is their biggest asset. And I'm very, very aware of that, so I'm grateful that you would spend a couple of hours on Friday just starting this conversation for us. So, I'll have 1 or 2 questions for the panelists, and then I want to get the audience members to ask questions. And I know some of you may have comments, but what I ask is that you try to frame your comment into a question and try to keep it very, very brief. So my first question is to Joe. Specifically with regards to Ferguson and with regards to what happened in New York with Eric Garner. I was reading an article, and you know how they have these polls and statistics and stuff, and 78% of white people think that Michael Brown was guilty and that the police was totally justified in shooting him. And 60% to 63% in terms of what happened in New York with Eric Garner, see nothing wrong in terms of, don't see that the police was in error. Don't see any type of racism going on. So my question to you is, what's the matter with white people?
Speaking efficiently as
Wow.
You got me with that one.
I think what this really speaks to is the problem of definition. Some of the Muslim scholars of the past, like Ibn Taymiyyah and others, have said most people differ about things because they do not agree on a definition. So when we say racist, what is racist in the mind of the average white American, and what they have been trained to think is racist, right? It is much different than it is in the mind of an African American, right? And so, when some people think of racism, they think of personal relationships. Other people think of structural racism, and other people are even oblivious to that. And so I think that's definitely at play. And another problem is the way that the media frames and indicts people of color in the news before anything happens. How is it possible that Michael Brown, regardless of whether he was involved in any petty crime or misdemeanor before that, is somehow, well, he was killed. Well, he shouldn't have been stealing. He should have been walking in the middle of the road. How is that, gauge that to the reaction of, say, the guy that shot up the movie theater. And this is, just me saying that is indicative of the problem. Because I can tell you Michael Brown's name and Eric Garner's name and Tamir Rice's name, and I can tell you all of these specific names in specific cities, and then when I talk about the guy with the orange hair that was dressed up like the Joker and went into a movie theater, what was his name?
Nobody knows.
Anyone? That's the problem, right? And that's a direct cause of us as communities not holding the media to account for the way that they cover these issues, and I would say even in religious communities, not holding religious leaders, whether they be Muslim, Jew, or Christian, to account for not addressing these issues as well, because that's another form of media that people experience.
Thank you. Brother Derek, you answered one of the questions that I had in your talk in terms of what should social activism look like for someone who has maybe a different temperament. But I want to go, because I know you work specifically with young black men, and I've worked quite a bit with you in that area. I want to talk this whole idea of, it is, young black men, they should pull their pants up, or they should look like this, or maybe if they wouldn't look so intimidating, they wouldn't be seen as a target, or maybe they should finish school, maybe they should do this, whatever. All the excuses that we see in terms of, especially the blame and the victim that we see in even Tamir Rice's case. You pull up and you say that the boy was 12 years old, but you say he's 20, right? You have all this idea where, there was a study that showed that even the way people see young African American boys, they see them as older, they see them as more intimidating. There were actually studies done on this. So with your work, I want you to speak to that. And what would you say to someone who may have that particular mindset?
Thank you for your question. There's an obvious double standard in American society in particular when it comes to how we judge a black male. Much of it is due to the media's depiction, as my brother Joe stated so eloquently. The media's depiction of the black male is not one that we should be proud of. If you're a black male in America and you go rob 5 banks, jack 3 people for their foreign cars, and end up in the police chase, you make the news. But if you go to school and you win the science contest and you win the spelling bee and you go on to become a doctor, nobody knows who you are. So, just like the guy with the orange hair, the white guy, who shot up the theater, who wasn't made famous. But that same white guy could go on and do something brilliant and groundbreaking in academia, and he could become famous. A black male of the same age, do something brilliant in academia, become a great scholar, never know who he is. But if he goes to Washington, D.C., and he gets in his trunk and he fires off a bunch of shots and kills 15, 16 people, he goes down in American history. This is a big, big, big problem. Now, why do I work with black males specifically? Now, I don't just work with black males exclusively, but my focus is on the black male. My focus is on the black male because that is where the need is greatest. We're all sitting on beautiful carpet here in the masjid. If there were 4 strong men that could go to each corner in the room and lift the carpet that's at the bottom underneath everyone else, guess what? Everything else comes up right along with it. Is that right? So if the black male is at the bottom rung of the ladder in every category of civilized behavior, I believe that is where our focus should be. If we lift them, then everybody that's on top of them will come up quite naturally. So I believe that it is everybody's duty to do something in that area. Can I answer your question, brother? But there was a second part to it.
Well, I said you actually answered it in your actual comments.
Okay, thank you. And if I may say one more thing,
sure.
That slipped my mind during the opening. I believe that there's a battle for the superiority of culture in Islam. And I think that we have to begin to delineate the difference between the religion of Islam, its way of life, and the various cultures that come into the religion. That's all I want to say. Assalamu alaikum.
So, Sister Yasmin, you being an attorney, I was always interested in, okay, how are grand juries chosen, right? Why is it so hard to get any type of conviction? So I want to ask you that question, and I'm asking you the question. I know the answer, but for the benefit of the audience. And then my follow-up question to you would be, with the judge, is it very much possible for the person that chooses the grand jury to choose a grand jury that's totally in line with their political views their social worldview to sit on a grand jury for years?
So to answer that question, first of all, the grand jury originated in England and it's been around for centuries. And I also want to preface this by saying I'm not a criminal law attorney, so I did have to ask my friends for this information and look it up myself. So if I misspeak or misstate anything, please, there's attorneys in the room, help me out. And the concept of the grand jury is also in the Fifth Amendment, and it says that no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. So it's a little bit different on the federal level than it is in here in the state of Texas. When I spoke to a friend in the DA's office, they told me that the grand jury is selected either at random by a pool of registered voters or by a judge. They can select their own members of the grand jury, and that's very controversial because of what you just said, that it's likely to be corrupt. You can, if you're picking and choosing who you want to serve on this grand jury, you can pick people who are like-minded, and that's a problem, I believe. But on the federal level, they're chosen from a pool of registered voters. And it's different from a trial, a regular trial. In a grand jury, you're not deciding, and a lot of people have been confusing this issue, you're not deciding whether or not they're guilty or not guilty. All you're deciding is whether there's enough evidence and probable cause to charge them with the crime that they are brought in for. Whatever it works as is the police officer calls the DA's office whenever he wants to charge someone with a crime. They present the evidence, the DA accepts the charges, and presents the evidence to a jury. There's no other lawyer in the room. It's just the prosecutor. I'm not sure if on the state level or if there's a judge present. I don't think there is. There's no judge present to even object to anything. So it's the DA presenting the evidence to a pool of jurors, and they decide whether or not there's enough evidence here for probable cause to charge that person with the crime. So another response to your question is it's very rare that you don't indict someone. It's very rare that you can't charge someone with the crime. And in the legal world, we say you can indict a ham sandwich. It's that easy. If you can't indict someone, there's something wrong. It's usually on purpose, and the prosecutor doesn't want to indict that person.